Hello, my name is Jennifer Gardner, and this is the Rome Howell Podcast, where I speak to thought leaders, writers, speakers, and disruptors who have reinvented themselves and created work they love. I created Rome Howell as a way to explore and share with you the stories of people who inspire me, multi-talented creative professionals with a unique approach to life and work. Join me as we look under the hood and discover what inspires them, how they got to where they are, their fears, struggles, and triumphs. By listening to them, my goal is that we are inspired to do the next big, without-a-box thing in our own lives. David Kadavy is a top 20 Amazon author, the voice behind the Love Your Work podcast, a contributor to several of my favorite publications, including Huffington Post and McSweeney's, someone I follow passionately and always learn a tremendous amount from. He writes about topics that interest me most: creativity, productivity, maintaining focus, and perfectionism. So it makes total sense that when I went to prepare his interview for broadcast here, I would suffer from a terrible bout of perfectionism paralysis myself, the net result of which is that it took me forever to finish this episode, and if not for the gentle prodding from my producer and editor, Andrea, this conversation may never have seen the light of day. I really have no idea how I worked up the nerve to even ask David if he would let me interview him in the first place. It must have occurred during some late-night manic work spree, because I honestly have no recollection of composing that email. Somehow, an email was sent, and I received one from David saying yes. After that, one more brief email exchange, and boom, the interview was scheduled. And then the day came, and we talked, and the conversation just flowed. What impresses me the most about David is how transparent he is about his struggle to do his own creative work. In fact, this very struggle is grist for his artistic mill. David has a new book about to launch called The Heart to Start, all about connecting with the art inside you. I mean, how can I not love to read a book like this? David has plans to self-publish this on Kindle, at least the last I heard. And he will chronicle his struggle to figure that piece out, which I'm sure will become still more rivetingly honest content for me to consume about the anxieties, struggles, and triumphs of a determined creator attempting something daunting and new. David's next big project is his book entitled Getting Art Done, Kill Procrastination, Boost Your Productivity, and Make Your Masterpiece. This one I also can't wait to read. I really could have used it when preparing this episode. So, for those of you hoping to find the heart to start your next chapter, be it a work of art, a career move, a business venture, a relationship, whatever, you must not miss this conversation, because the insights we openly share will enlighten and inspire, and maybe even shine some light on new possibilities. Hey listeners, one more thing. I recently launched my Mindset, Momentum, and Manifestation workshop, and I'm super excited to announce that I will be holding this workshop again in January 2018. There are a limited number of seats available. I'm intentionally keeping the group small because I want everyone to get the individualized attention they need. So if you are interested in learning productivity and mindset and manifestation strategies to get laser focused on what you want to create and to then help you take the action necessary to reach your goals in 2018 and beyond, you can sign up by emailing me at romehowell@gmail.com. You can also get updates about new workshops by following me on Facebook at Rome Howell. And please, please, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on the website or on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play Music, or wherever you consume and get your podcast content. And now let's listen to the interview.
Jennifer.
David.
How was your trip?
We had an amazing time, and it was so beautiful, and it was a beautiful time of the year to just be there.
Early fall.
Not too hot, and got lucky with good weather, so it's all good.
Awesome.
Yeah. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, I've just been writing and stuff and podcasting as well. trying to keep the podcast going.
I love your work. I know you're saying love your work.
You.
I love your work. I love to be spontaneous, I love the realness of the medium is kind of why I'm hooked.
Oh, on podcasts.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. It's like a lot of people, they like to listen to the podcasts that are highly produced, and it's a history show, or it's a crime. Crime is big. There's lots of crime shows, but I really just see it as a way to have conversations with people around the world, even if I'm not a part of that conversation.
Exactly. And you are a master at it, I have to say. I'm serious.
Thank you. I know.
I'm a huge gushing fan, okay?
I'm glad to know that some of you are out there.
Oh, that's so crazy because, look, you've published your numbers and I've seen like how well you do, and that you would still be having that conversation with yourself when you know what your numbers are is kind of crazy.
Well, the conversation meaning, should I keep doing this?
Yeah.
I imagine. It's my job, and I'm treating it like my job. I'm spending that much time on it. So when there's not really very much money coming in, you certainly want to ask yourself every once in a while, am I crazy? Should I keep doing this?
Okay, so you see the podcast as being your actual employment, your job?
Well, the podcast and writing. Here's the thing is that a couple of years ago, I wrote a book in 2011 and Design for Hackers, and started making courses based around that. And I did some speaking, which, I traveled around the world speaking and stuff. And then it was just a lot of different things. And I eventually came to the realization that I don't want the things that I create, the writing and the podcasting, I don't want those to be a marketing vehicle for some other thing. I would like for those things to be the things that I concentrate my time and effort on, and that I work on making as good as I can, and that somehow I get paid for that. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a big content marketing bias out there, which I do content marketing as well, but that's mostly because I need to do it to make the money to pay the bills.
Right.
But I think that there's a lot of the craft gets lost in writing or in podcasting because it is a marketing channel for some other thing. Mm-hmm. I do see it as a job.
Okay. I respect that. I started podcasting without any social media following. I had under 1,000 friends on Facebook and very few Twitter followers and maybe a couple hundred Instagram followers. And I was very quiet on social media because I was kind of anti-social media, to be honest. And my numbers steadily increase. Some shows do better than others. And I quickly found out that without having had a New York Times bestseller or a mass media platform that was promoting me, it would be really difficult to make money podcasting. And at first I was really disappointed. And then it got me to be, thinking in a really creative way. Like, okay, so everything is growing steadily. What can I offer of value to my listeners? And so that's the place that I find myself in now. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you and share our conversation with whoever may be listening to me, because I think you are a master at going inside, being, introspective and mining your internal processes and your thoughts and your voice and coming up with value for people that's substantive and valuable and meaningful. And I want to say thank you. And then I just want to ask you questions about how do you do that? Because you're so good at it. You're one of the best. And everything is, at a deep level. And in today's culture, that is so rare and special.
That's the biggest compliment I think I could possibly get, because that's exactly what I'm going for.
Yeah.
So how do I do that?
Yeah, how do you do that? Like, for example, here, I know we're supposed to be listening to you, but I've done a little bit of homework. And I love what you said in that episode about puncturing the vacuum, the space between the status quo and the true desires of the people in the world, and finding that voice and listening to that voice and giving voice to that voice. I mean, how beautiful the way you put that.
Well, yeah. And that's when I'm talking about this phenomenon called the voice, which is something that we all have in our heads, which is there's always these little ideas popping in our heads, but at least in my experience, we bat them down because we've been taught to fit in. We've been taught not to stand out. We've been taught to stay in line. And that's not a valuable trait in this day and age. And the thing is that whatever thoughts that you're having, there's a bunch of other people that are having the exact same thoughts. I mean, things are always being invented at the same time, like Samuel Morse and some other guy. I can't remember this guy's name, but they both invented the telegraph. It's like a wheat something. I mean, there were a lot of different players involved with the electric telegraph, but like Thomas Edison, and there was another guy who invented the incandescent light bulb around the same time. And, things have been invented around the world all the same. We're all working with the same source material. There's always new cultural things going on. There's always new technologies. And so there's always these vacuums that are just waiting to explode, which are created by the tension caused between the way things are right now and the way things people want them to be. And so you just have to be the person who listens to your voice and is brave enough to go ahead and pursue it, listen to it, and see what happens. You're not always going to be right, but people are going to remember if you're right 1 out of 100 times, people are going to remember the one time that you were right. If you're right 0 out of 0 times, then nobody's going to remember you.
Yeah.
I mean, in the case of 0 out of 0, you're not even trying to be. You're not even making the attempts, So, listening to that voice and going ahead and speaking to it through writing or through conversations with other people and remaining humble about it in a way that you don't know. Well, is it this way? Maybe I think it's this way because this, that, and the other thing. You don't have to be pretending like you know everything, because you certainly don't. But if you're honest about what you do know and your thought process, then that starts to create some kind of a conversation. And then as far as making it useful for others, that's just, the older I get, the more there's things where I'm like, I wish I could have told myself this, 10 years ago. And so there's people who are 10 years younger than me or who are my same age and haven't learned some of the same things. Or there's people who teach me things that are younger than I am. So there's always something to teach others too. So you can just kind of present your worldview along with what you learn from these conversations that you have with yourself and with others and with your own writing, and you can make them into useful things.
Well, thank you for writing down the things that you're hearing in your head and making useful things. I find them incredibly inspiring.
Is there anything that, I'd love to hear about what sort of stuff has resonated with you?
Everything. I'm a pretty religious listener. I have to be honest, lately I have not listened as much because I have been so busy creating my own content and planning my own content. But
that's great.
Yeah.
If you never need to listen to my podcast again, then I guess I guess it's a little presumptive to think that I have anything to do with it. But if you never need to listen to my podcast again, it's a good thing.
Oh, no. I mean, believe me, what I'll do is I'll binge listen to a bunch of them all at one time. And I've been doing that fairly consistently at regular intervals for the last year and a half since I found you. And also I have to thank you for agreeing to be on my show because I'm new. So
wait, you told me that you had 1 million downloads. What?
No, it's funny. I am not obsessed with download numbers at all. Of course, I'd like to have more downloads, but there's been a steady increase. And for me, it's not about the downloads. It's about something more. And I don't know if you've talked about this recently, but it's about legacy. And it's about leaving an imprint and a record of, and this is an audio record of things that I was thinking about, conversations I was having with amazing people, having that live as long as someone's paying the hosting fees I think it's valuable. I used to take pictures and I didn't ever care if anybody ever saw them. And I used to show my work. I showed my work all over the world. And then I just sort of thought, you know what? I can just have the idea and be satisfied and then make it and execute and have it. And it's okay if nobody sees it. I'm really not obsessed with downloads, although maybe I should be, but it's more about making something meaningful for me.
There's a lot of different ideas here. One is, I guess the download's not mattering. I can identify with that. I have to admit, I want more downloads. I want more downloads mostly just because I want to make enough money to make the podcast what I want it to be. If I can have fewer downloads and make that amount of money, and there's still people emailing me and inviting me on their podcasts and things like that, I think that would make me happy. So I guess in terms of impact, that is gratifying to me when somebody does tell me that my work has had an impact on them or has helped them in some way. That's very meaningful to me. Now, on the part of legacy, though, I have very unpopular opinions about this, or what is probably an unpopular opinion, and it's not even necessarily opinion because I haven't fully formed it, but this is just what I'm thinking lately. I used to think a lot about like making something that would live beyond my own life. And that was even something that I said when I first got my book deal, and my first book deal, and my friend was like, "Oh, wow, you're going to be an author now." I'm like, "Yeah, when I'm dead, people are going to be reading my book." And he was like, "What?" Like, that was the first thing that I thought of, I guess. And I guess I still think about that, but I don't know. Lately, I am feeling a little inspired or empowered by the idea that life doesn't have meaning. And so because of that, then you should just do whatever you want with it. And as a byproduct, you end up helping people and having an impact on them. I worry that maybe it's a little bit of a defense against something that I want to prevent. And the thing that I want to prevent is convincing myself that I'm doing it in order to impact others and help others, and that that's the only reason why, when in fact the reason is something else, or that it's a mixture of reasons and I've decided that like that's the one, and I somehow get a sense of satisfaction out of believing that. Because I think that that's a thing that happens a lot in life, is that we will tell ourselves about what our intentions are, and we get more satisfaction out of telling ourselves that's our intention, and as a result we get less of what we're trying to accomplish.
Wow.
Just to put more detail into it, and I haven't written about this at length or thought about this very much, so it's kind of coming off the top of my head. I'm much better with things that I've written about. But yeah, if I tell myself I want to have an impact on others, and if that makes me feel good that I want to have an impact on others, then that will cause me to take a posture in my work that actually makes it less helpful for others.
Huh.
I don't really know I don't know the exact details of how that works, but that's a thing that I am trying to avoid.
Okay, fair enough. You know, there's a lot of ideas that you just expressed that are I'm gonna be thinking about them for a while. So
that's another thing that I find very gratifying is to make people think. Yeah.
But I love the idea, what you said about how you want to have impact, and you want to have impact now, and the impact is measured monetarily, right? To a certain extent.
I see the money as the money's just a way to. There was a great quote by Jeff Goins, and I think Jeff Goins might have been quoting somebody else when he said this, but it wasn't. I think he was quoting Walt Disney, who was saying, "We don't make movies to make money. We make money so we can make more movies."
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And so that's my view with the money right now, which, I'm in a transitional period where I'm trying to double down on the writing and the podcasting. And so my income has dropped a bit because I'm not concentrating on the other parts of my business as much. And so, yeah, I want to make money off of the things that I'm doing so I can do more of the things that I'm doing.
Oh.
That's really that's why the money is important to me.
Yeah. And the next book is Getting Art Done.
Yeah, it is. Getting Art Done. Or that's the working title. It could change.
Yeah.
By the time this podcast comes out, it could change.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that book is really all about managing your mental energy in a way that can maximize your creative productivity, your creative output.
Oh,
now,
nice. I love that.
Something just happened this week, though.
What?
Which is I had written the first draft of Getting Art Done, and people had read it via email. I wrote a chapter every day for 30 days, and people got it via email. And then I let it sit for a while, and I collected feedback and everything, and I restructured the book. And then I realized, just last week, I basically cut off the entire first half of the book.
Huh.
So what I'm doing now is I'm taking that first half of the book and I'm fleshing that out, making it into another book. And so that one I'm hoping to get out before the end of the year. And that's called The Heart to Start.
Okay.
And it is all about connecting with the art that you have inside you, finding the fuel to get started. Because that's such an important thing. That's something that I've met so many people who have struggled with it. They talk about, they're going to start a blog, or they talk about, they're going to start a podcast. They never get around to do it. I've been one of those people so many times and was so glad that I finally took action and got started. So that's what I want to do with that book. And actually, if anybody who's listening is interested in that, they can just go to kadavy.net/tools. And I have basically a toolbox of different tools that I've used to boost my creative productivity. I actually tracked my creative productivity in 2016, and I ended up publishing 4 times the words that I did in 2015. And they were higher quality. My work got more noticed. People like you noticed my work. So I share those tools in that, and that all kind of ties into the things that I'm writing about with The Heart to Start and getting art done.
Oh, I love your work. I keep saying that. It's so funny. And that's the title of your podcast. But I really do. I just really like what you're doing. And I just signed up to get the tools. So I can't wait to see them. Yeah, this year I have been really immersed in studying productivity and mindset and visualization and journaling and manifestation techniques. And by practicing these things pretty regularly, my life in the last 11 months has completely changed.
What are the biggest changes that you've made?
Okay. This one is difficult to talk about because I haven't before. But that's good. It's perfect for this podcast, right?
Okay.
I would say the biggest change as a result of this is I've been working on my resistance, my subconscious resistance to exiting or scaling back the amount of legal work that I do. And so that I can create other streams of income and spend my time being more creatively working, right? And it's always been really super challenging for me to go from the mindset of the only way that I can make money is working as a lawyer to I can develop other income streams using my intellectual property, creativity, the things that I think, and my knowledge and my experience and my skills, my other skills that are non-litigation skills, my storytelling skills, which I use. Like there's a lot of overlap. And I feel like I have been able to transition from no, I can't do it to yes, I can. And in fact, I am doing it.
Awesome.
Yes.
So you're a courtroom lawyer. You do the thing where you stand up in front of the jury and the judge and you tell the story and weave the argument, etc.
Yes, I'm that kind of lawyer. I'm a storytelling
lawyer. That's a very valuable asset. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's an amazing experience. And I don't see myself completely stopping for a while, but my goal was to develop other income streams. And when I started, I had no idea what they would be. But now I have a clue. And part of why your work inspires me so much is that it gives me resources and ways to look inside to decide and determine what those things are. And so when you were talking about the heart to start, it's about, when you're a type A person like me and a perfectionist like me, right? It's really difficult, this concept, to embrace and go for and implement this concept of taking imperfect action.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, perfectionism is the bane of my existence.
You too?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't think it because of the quality of my work could be so much better.
No.
And
no, that's not what I was thinking you were going to say.
Well, because perfectionism is one of the it's almost like a humble brag problem. Is it like you're like I say I'm a perfectionist, and then people are like, you're a perfectionist? Your work is kind of not very good. No, but it is. There's a lot of ego in perfectionism. Is that you think that you expect that your work to reach a certain level, and you don't know what kind of person you are if you put something out that doesn't reach that quality. And then it turns into this cycle where you just never get the stuff out. So actually the heart to start, to be honest, Jennifer, is it is a fight against my own perfectionism in a way, is that it's going to be a short book. I'm just going to put it on Kindle at first. I'm doing crowdsourcing the editing. I'm not hiring a professional editor to do it. And so in a lot of ways, it's going to be hard for me to let it out there. And I think that it's something I shouldn't say, right? Because it's kind of telling your listeners, like, I'm just kind of throwing my book out there. It's not that good, but here it is. Go buy it or something. But usually when I do that, the quality ends up being just fine, and it's really just about myself, that I don't want to get the stuff out there, and I'm trying to have control over making it perfect and stuff. So that's part of it. Another part of it is that it's going to teach me the skills in the process. I'm going to learn the skills of publishing on Kindle. It'll be my first self-published book on Kindle. I'll learn a little bit about the marketing and stuff, and the pressure will be off, because this book I don't see as big of a deal as the book that follows it. And part of the reason why I'm doing this book now is because the other book, to make it what it needs to be, or what I can see it being, I just came to the point where I realized, wow, there's a lot of research to be done to make this the book that it can be. Mm-hmm. The Heart to Start, on the other hand, it is a little bit more fluid in terms of the concepts have come out of me. I don't need to do as much like supporting it with science and all that sort of stuff. And so it's a different book in that way.
Well, yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, it's really just overcoming perfectionism. That's been a theme in my career since the very first blog post that I ever wrote, which is talks about how I'm just barfing it out. I'm going to clean it up later. I sometimes suffer perfection paralysis, etc.
Yeah. Well, it's like, if you're going to walk the walk, you have to just like get it out there, right?
I mean, that's part of it too, is that I realized the stuff that I was preaching. Look, I write these books, Getting Art Done and The Heart to Start. In some ways, these books themselves are resistance. I'm writing them for myself so I can convince myself that I can write books, which I've already written a book and everything. But I'm also really trying to get to understand the process. And so I was looking at the advice that I'm giving in a lot of blog posts that I write in the books that I'm writing. And I'm like, I'm not working according to my own advice here, which I know full well that is it full well or full well? I don't know. I need to look up.
Full.
I know full well. You're probably right. I know full well that I'm writing these things for myself. And so when I write something and I realize that I'm contradicting what I actually do in my life, then that's a good reminder to change the way that I'm doing things. So I'm following my own advice by releasing this smaller book and learning from that experience to make the next book even better.
You're so delightful. It's so funny. Somebody once said to me that my brain was a 24-hour town. It was always going. I think that applies to you as well.
Oh, no.
No, it's a good thing. But my goodness, I often admit, look, I'm in my head. Sometimes I'm really in my head. I think you're really in your head. That's not a criticism, but oh my God. And you're making a cottage industry out of being in your head.
I am. You are right. But I think that the work that I do, though, helps me in a way. At least like doing the podcast is a way to force myself to be more in the moment. Yeah. Which forces you to not be in your head so much. And then you start rambling things. You start talking about things. And then you listen to them over and over again. You're like, oh, that's a neat idea. I should write about that idea. Yes. And if I were to just sit down at the computer and try to write the thing, I would just get stuck. Yeah. So I think that having the different modes of getting things out of your head can help you get out of your head a little bit, perhaps.
Yes, perhaps. Okay, so I have to thank you now for the first hour rule, because now I do that pretty regularly, thanks to you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love that.
What do you do with your first hour?
The shit I don't want to do. The stuff I want to do the least. Let's put it that way. Is that more eloquent?
Which things are that? Or which things do you want to do the least?
It's usually something that is writing related, where I have to analyze and solve a thorny legal issue, which probably isn't very stimulating to me. Like, it's something I must do that I don't really want to do. What do you want to do? What do I want to do? I want to have your life.
What would you, I mean, if let's just imagine for a moment that first hour is your best creative energy.
Okay.
And you want to maximize the way you're using that best creative energy. And you only have an hour of it, let's say. What would you want to spend it on?
I would probably write to my audience about something that I'm thinking about, having to do usually with being fully self-expressed, understanding story, telling story, the importance of story, and why that's meaningful and why that's good to have a skill where you can do that. I love to write about that. Because,
well, now, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, because I think that it's all about, this is how we connect. Yeah. This is how I connect in my trial practice. This is how I connect in social media. And this is what I want to show other people how to do. And there are strategies and tips and tools and techniques you can use to write about story and tell stories, either about yourself or another person or experience you've had. And I love that. Or just write about the creative process in general.
Yeah. And now let me ask you this. What time of day or what time of week do you actually get around to doing that writing?
I love to do it late at night, like after midnight. I love to. But I generally am most productive later in the day, like after 1 or 2 o'clock. And if there's no noise, like right now I'm at my office and sometimes it's really noisy out there and I get distracted. But when everybody starts going away and it gets quieter and quieter, then I really start to be able to tune in and it just flows.
Now, does your law work, does the type of mental energy that you use in your law work, when you empty that well, does that also empty your well for doing this other type of writing work?
It depends on what I'm writing. But yes, sometimes I really get into the creative flow of writing something legal because I use it as a storytelling mechanism. And I get into that creative flow and I get into the flow of telling my client's story or a piece of the story, depending on what it is I have to write. And I find it incredibly creatively satisfying. And it does not take away from my desire to write the more personal stuff, which I consider my personal or my true work. In fact, sometimes it fuels it. The problem is sometimes I get tired. If there's a difficult legal issue that I have to really solve, sometimes, my brain gets a little tired and I run out of steam.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's the thing that I'm really fascinated by, and that's the thing that I'm always trying to optimize in my own life is, okay, what's the best creative energy that I have? What do I want to use that on? And how can I protect it in a way that other things aren't going to sap that energy?
Oh my God, that's the ultimate question because it comes down to the issue of personal boundaries, professional boundaries, time management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At least for me. So, I mean, that's always been my struggle, is feeling like my creative energy was going into my clients' cases excessively and not so much towards projects that I found meaningful and important. And as I mature, I'd say get older, but, I don't want to admit that that's happening. But I'll just say as I mature, and I get this sense of mortality, and I've had some health issues that have made me really have to look at that. My time has become so much more precious to me, and my ability to access what I'm thinking and feeling and expressing that in this new way. Because before I was a visual artist, I wasn't writing. I was making imagery, which always had a heavy conceptual component. And I would write to go along with it and explain that when I was showing work. And I would think about what I was creating and I would go out and I would create it. And that was a huge part of it for me. So now that I'm doing it more publicly in social media, yeah, it's really different. And I want to do it more and more. It's like a drug.
It's neat that you have, this is such a buzzword, but I think it's so important, synergies. You said that when you work on your law cases, sometimes you get to exercise your storytelling and that helps feed your other work. And then maybe that happens with the visual work that you do as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good way to manage that energy. And it's a good way to, make the career out of being in your head in a way, is because you can do all these different things and they kind of work together with one another, and certain products can come out of those things.
Oh, yeah. And I always have said to people who were curious about the fact that I was like multi-talented and doing these seemingly different things, I don't see them as being different. I think that it's all creative. It's all creative work. At least it is for me, because I always have had an analytical approach to my creative work and a creative approach to my intellectual work. So to me, it's all coming from the same place in my brain. And I do think that I did have the Myers-Briggs, as controversial as that may be. I finally had it done this summer, and I'm an INFP, and solidly in every category. So, it makes total sense that I would say what I just said, given my personality structure, because I'm just like really in my head. And now I'm more comfortable than ever being in my head. That's kind of really where I want to be. It's becoming more and more difficult to come out, in fact. Can you relate to that at all?
Well, what you described is definitely sounds like an introvert marker, is like wanting to be in your head. So I'm an ambivert.
Uh-huh.
I think I've gotten more introverted as I've matured.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I definitely like to be in my head a lot. But I also crave social contact, but I kind of want to have control over how much social contact I have.
Yeah.
Because if I go to dinner and there's 12 people at dinner, I'm just like, I can't handle this. Give me two people.
Yeah.
I want to be able to interact on a smaller, more intimate basis. And then, and I just love to do the reading and the thinking to myself and the writing to myself and writing to myself and being able to analyze the thoughts that I write, because I don't have it right the first time, like that's the tough thing about not being in your head or being an off the cuff person, is like you're supposed to think about the right thing right off the cuff. That doesn't really work. I mean, I think I get better at it. Like the more that I work on my podcast, the more that I write, the more that I have a grab bag of things I've already written about and thought about that I can then talk about, which may be the total opposite of not being in your head, but at least it feels like it's less of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that impresses me about you is how openly you share your struggles, your thoughts about quitting podcasting, for example, your existential questions. How did you start doing that? Because I think now it's much more popular to do that, but I think you're one of the originals.
No, I'm just really ripping off James Altucher. But I'm not trying to rip off. I mean, there's certainly like probably periods where I just tried to channel James Altucher, and then I realized that his style is not my style. And then it arrived at me just telling the best truth that I could. I think I got an advantage in that when I wrote my book in 2011, I had my platform kind of explode. And in a very niche group of people, I was mildly famous. It's hard to describe exactly how that works. It would be like if I went to a conference and there were people from my industry there, a lot of them would recognize me. But if I was in the grocery store, nobody was going to run into me and recognize me at the grocery store or something. It was like total like D-level celebrity status. And so that was an interesting experience, because your identity gets tumbled around a lot. And I certainly had periods of time where like I thought I was really famous and I thought that I was great for it and stuff, and like it got in the way of me being able to do good and useful and impactful work, kind of like we were talking about.
Yes.
And I think it's natural to have your personality fluctuate in certain ways, especially when things in your life change and you've got to you kind of try on one jacket and that doesn't work, and you try on a different one, and then eventually it's like the Goldilocks principle, I guess, of this isn't quite right. This isn't quite right. But now this is quite right. So a little adjustment period.
You just described my entire life, my entire adult life. Goldilocks syndrome.
Yeah, and it's fine. And this might be useful for you. In the research that I've been doing for my book, I've been reading this book by this economist at University of Chicago. His name is David Galenson, and it's called Old Masters, Young Geniuses. And he basically analyzes the careers of different creators, whether they're painters or novelists or poets or the music composers. And his theory is that there are two different approaches. There are people who are conceptual innovators, and there are people who are experimental innovators. So conceptual innovators would be somebody like Picasso, who pretty early on in his career invented Cubism along with, if I'm saying it right, George Braque. I'm just going to anglify it. And after Cubism, he lived until he was in his 90s and didn't really do a whole lot of significant work. And you can actually track that by, how often is certain work cited in art history books and included in collections and retrospectives and stuff. His most important work happened when he was in his late 20s because he was a conceptual innovator. And a conceptual innovator kind of has the idea in his or her head and is able to execute it. And in fact, sometimes with somebody like Andy Warhol, might hire somebody else to execute the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Now, the other type of innovator is the experimental innovator. And George Cezanne? Is it George Cezanne?
Well, I know Cezanne. I don't know the first name.
Maybe it was Paul Cezanne. Anyway, I'm not sounding as smart as I should. Anyway, Cezanne was an experimental innovator. The older that Cezanne got, the more valuable, the more influential his paintings were. And you can see writings of his where he's like, I'm trying to figure this thing out and I'm just never going to feel satisfied. And then after he wrote that, like a month later, he died in his, I think it was maybe 79 or something, because he was constantly experimenting. He was painting to discover. He wasn't painting an idea that he already had in his head. The process of painting was the process of struggling with, okay, what is my impression? What is it that I'm seeing? And how can I put that on the painting and doing it over and over again? It's like the paintings themselves weren't even a work of art to him. It was just a byproduct of the process. And so in reading about this theory of experimental versus conceptual innovators, I've really come to understand my own work a lot better, is that I think I'm an experimental innovator. Yeah. If I can call myself an innovator in any way, is that the things that I create are my process. And so that's tough though when you have the perfectionism too, because then you can't call your work finished, you can't ship your work. I mean, that's one of those things where now that I see that pattern, I feel like it's a very powerful thing for me. That might be what you are. You might be an experimental innovator as well.
Yeah, I would say an experimental, and maybe, I don't know, I'll coin a new one here, or may I be so bold, an experiential innovator, because I think that part of what I'm doing is stretching, growing, trying new things, trying on ideas, and sharing my journey with people who are interested. Yeah,
exactly. You maybe have some kind of an ideal that you are working towards that you might not know exactly what it is, but you're getting a little closer to that every day. And as a result, your work is probably improving along with that.
I hope so. I mean, it would be.
I hope so for myself as well.
Oh my God. Wouldn't it be terrible if it just got worse?
If I just got worse. Yeah, sometimes I think about that too, because, I did write my first book. That was a long time ago. It was like almost like 7 years ago. And I hear these things about like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby and then just never could pull off anything similar again for the rest of his life. And you would even say when he would write, like, in an introduction to a reintroduction of The Great Gatsby, that like, I just don't have it anymore. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certain things that I don't have, but in other ways, I feel like my work has matured. So I'm not as great at like tapping into raw emotion. I think that because I've matured, and maybe this is part of what you're seeing with the vulnerability or whatever that other people see, is that I view it very objectively now. I just see myself as another speck of dust, another mortal being. And so what does it really matter if I tell you that, like, I cried when I watched the Steve Jobs commencement address because it reminded me like how much I was beholden to my own passion and curiosity. Like, what's the harm in saying that? If life is meaningless, then none of this means anything anyway, right? So
yeah,
that's like my unpopular view lens.
No, but then you have to, if that's true, then there's no place in your mind for perfectionism.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a constant battle, though, of course, because that ego is there. So it's not going to go away.
It's not going away.
It gets better. It gets better.
Well, I mean, I at least getting a little bit better at catching it when it surfaces. And I'm getting better at not letting it stop me so much. So,
are there any special tricks that you use for that?
Well, awareness is the biggest one. Just being aware and tuning into myself. That's the biggest trick. And, a little meditation, journaling religiously, and just trying to create the space for some quiet so that I can be in touch with me, because there's so much noise, and I live in Los Angeles, and there's traffic and there's people. And this is why when I get super busy with work that I am less enthusiastic about doing, I get very irritable, because then I feel like there's no space for me. And not only am I stopped from doing what I really want to do just by the pure logistics of my life, but I also don't have the time to connect and get centered and focused and grounded so I can even feel what that is that I want to do.
That takes a lot of work and a lot of intention, right? Because like you were saying, living in a city, there's always something going on. There's always noise. There's always this band is coming into town. You've got to see this, or this new movie is out, or you've got to watch this Netflix series. There's something going on in the news. You have to stay informed of the news 24 hours a day. There's a million reasons to do the exact opposite of being in touch with your own internal world. And that takes effort.
Yeah, it takes effort. And then also there's the additional issue of not everybody around me thinks like this or in these terms. And so, I'll go to dinner. Yeah. You understand what I mean, right? Like, I'll go to dinner and make a comment like something to the effect of, wow, I mean, to even like for a person to comment so insightfully the process that they are going through, and how they're not just like looking at the objective thing they're commenting about, but they're also processing their own reaction to that and then articulating it in a way that resonates with other people. And gee, what a process. And I really respect that. And people looked at me like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I try to keep people that don't understand that out of my life, but you can't always. Sometimes it's too late.
Yeah. Good for you that you've at least been able to do that. So I have a couple more like things. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, and maybe we'll do a part 2. I don't know. May I be so bold as to suggest? When and how, I guess it's a compound question, but when and how did you embark on this path that we're talking about, that we're describing, this introspective, self-aware, and wanting to communicate about that to other people path?
Ooh, very slow, messy process that I think really just simply started with me feeling like I had something in my brain like my brain was hatching. I think one of the first times that I felt that, I was living in Silicon Valley, and this was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, tech, to me, that whole Silicon Valley world was insane. I'm like, I don't like where this is going. And everybody was so obsessed with, raising venture capital money and building startups and the image of being a startup founder. And it just felt like there was noise. Like I felt like I couldn't tap into what was going on in my own brain. And so I moved to Chicago. I left Silicon Valley. I had job offers nipping at my tail. And I moved to Chicago. I was like, I need a cold winter. I'm originally from Nebraska, so I can't say I'm used to cold winters, but I at least have that was when I would always learn things. It's snowing outside. You're not going anywhere. Just get a programming book or a book and call it a night.
Yeah.
I needed a cold winter. I got myself a 2-bedroom apartment for the same price as the little bedroom that I had in my flat that I was sharing with other people in San Francisco. And I went to Chicago and I just explored. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years later, I got a book deal from that. Mm. And so that was one time. And then, I think a lot just lately, just looking at the state of the world and how not present so many people are, and how people are profiting over making people not present, and the people who are not present aren't even aware of it.
Yes.
I just wanted to do the exact opposite of that and hope that through sharing what I've learned along the way, maybe I can pull a couple people with me.
Well, you pulled me.
Great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. We could start our cult.
Yeah. An ethical cult.
Right now. Yes, ethical. Yes, ethical cult. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so one other thing. Why the move to Colombia?
Well, there's a combination variety of reasons, but I think that ultimately it comes down to the fact that I love to create, and this turned out to be like that perfect place for me to optimize my creative output. Mm-hmm. So I had already spent a couple of mini lives here. I'd spent a couple of months a few different times, and you can just really get into a rhythm here in Medellin. It is the city of the eternal spring. The average temperature year round is room temperature. The sun rises and sets the same day. You don't have this stuff where it's like the pitch black at 4 p.m. in December. The cost of living is cheaper. And since I was going to double down on writing and podcasting, that was going to be important. Yeah. And it's also the culture. It really helps me disconnect. Disconnection is a very important part of doing good creative work. Incubation, disconnecting from your work so that your ideas can incubate is very important. And this is a place that I find it really great. You're sort of forced to disconnect when you're not working, because I'm not a native Spanish speaker, so I'm constantly operating in a different language. It's like I have a work language and then I've got a personal life language in a way. And the people are very laid back here. So it just turned out to be the right combination for me at this particular point in time. Will I be here forever? Who knows? I have no idea. But it works very well for me right now.
Wow. It sounds fantastic. How's the food?
I eat boring food.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. No, but there's really good restaurants. Not so much traditional Colombian food, which is pretty good, but it's very plain. But there's a lot of good restaurants here that are kind of like American bistro style restaurants they're really good. They're like way cheaper than they would be in Los Angeles or Chicago or something like that. So yeah, there is good food, and I partake in that from time to time. But I mostly eat really boring food because in part it helps me with my optimization of my creative output.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to let me question you.
Thank you. It's an honor, one, to hear that my work has an impact on you in some way, and that you have questions that you want to ask me. I mean, that's just great to know that there are people out there who are processing what I'm writing and podcasting and saying, and even kind of getting some of the hidden messages in there, or at least understanding it to a level where they're telling me my philosophy right back to me, even if it's something I never really said out loud.
Yeah, no, like I said, your work really resonates with me. Everything you say, you think about, you talk about, you write about, it's like, yeah.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's a weird world today where if you really search for the truth, that's like the most contrarian thing that you can possibly say.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to my guest, David Kadavy, and thank you for listening. If you have any questions and to get on the list for my Mindset, Momentum, and Manifestation workshop, feel free to email me at romehowell@gmail.com. And you can go on Apple Podcasts and subscribe and rate and review the show. I would really appreciate that. Rome Howell is produced in Los Angeles, California, with production support and editing services by Andrea Klunder and Edwin Ruiz at the Creative Imposter Studios in Chicago. I'm Jennifer Gardner. Let's stay connected at Rome Howell on Facebook, at Jen B. Gardner on Twitter, and at Jen B. Gardner 22 on Instagram. Thanks again for listening, and take care.